karaoke room where Huijin and her lackeys assaulted her sister. The undeniable evidence leaves Huijin speechless, her eyes widening in shock as if they might pop out of their sockets. Mr. Kim stays silent, feeling utterly devastated. The screams of Diane begging for forgiveness echo through the room as the trashy ladies continue to beat her to a pulp. Seeing the concrete evidence, Mrs. Kim's jaw drops, and she quickly hangs up the hotline, saying she'll call them back later. On the other hand, Huijin starts yelling at Jean, demanding to know how he got those files. Jean remains silent for a moment, and then the scene flashes back to the outside of the Kim's residence. Inside one of the rooms, Jean is seen sneaking around the house. He opens a laptop and copies all of the data onto a pen drive. In the present, Mr. Kim grits his teeth in frustration, feeling that his kids are a total disappointment, but Huijin quickly tries to reassure her father, explaining that she had a good reason for everything. Mr. Kim, however, angrily tells her to shut up. Jean then reveals that he also has files involving Jisoo Kim. He explains to the Kims that their children always save videos of their conquests. He states that he has dozens of clips showing their violent behavior, beating up kids at school, extorting money and valuables from their victims, and even the latest clip of his sister being assaulted by a group of girls at karaoke. Huijin is shaking like a leaf with all these truth bombs exploding around her. But her mother quickly jumps in to defend her daughter, claiming that our boy is just trying to threaten them and that he won't get away with it, but Jean reminds her that he didn't start this mess. And what he's doing now is hardly a threat compared to hiring a bunch of gangsters to attack him, and makes it clear that he has recorded a lot of it too. The father facepalms in utter disappointment, and asks our boy if he did all this just because his kids assaulted his sister first. Jean responds that, as a parent, they have the right to take their children's side at all costs. So as a brother, he will do whatever it takes to protect his sister as well. The man understands where he's coming from and points out that they'll cover her treatment and offer a hefty settlement to make amends. But our boy makes it clear that this isn't necessary. The father is puzzled and asks what he means by that. He then inquires if Jean would like his kids to apologize to his sister. Hearing her father, Huijin grits her teeth and thinks to herself that she'd rather bite her tongue and bleed to death than apologize. On the other hand, our boy makes it clear that an apology won't undo the time his sister spent in fear and pain. So he insists that if they really want to compensate him, he wants his sister to never have to see Jisoo or Huijin Kim again. This demand rattles Huijin's nerves. But her father quickly agrees, stating that he'll have his kids transfer schools or perhaps even send them abroad to study. Naturally, the mother and daughter let out a piercing scream in protest. But the father quickly shuts them down and turns his attention back to our boy, asking if this would be enough to satisfy him. Our boy states that he wants them gone from the school starting tomorrow. In response, the father says he'll inform the school, and once that's settled, Huijin begins to cry and her tears flow out involuntarily. Just as our boy starts to leave, the father quickly stops him and reminds him that since he agreed to the demands, he'd like our boy to delete all of the videos he found. Our boy shoots the old man a death glare, and the father can tell from the intensity of his that this kind of deadly glare doesn't belong to a high schooler. Jis makes it clear that he's not a fool and then begins to walk away, slamming the office door behind him with a resounding thud. Once outside, he finally heads home. His grandpa rushes to open the door and asks if he saw Kai while Dian is seen crying in the background. Jis is startled to see them so worried about him, but he smiles and reassures them that no one hurt him. As he begins to enter the house, the old man points out that the people they encountered seemed dangerous. Jis replies that they just stopped by to talk, nothing more. The sister then mentions that something about those people didn't feel right and that she and Grandpa were very worried. Jis quickly tells her not to worry about anything other than getting better. Jis then hints to his sister that, from now on, she'll never have to walk down the stairs again because he's taken care of it. Of course, this doesn't make much sense to her at the moment, but she'll likely figure out what he meant soon enough. The next morning, they head to the school. Once inside, they part ways to go to their respective classes. As Dian enters her classroom, she tries to avoid making eye contact with Huijin. However, her steps falter when she hears students talking about how Huijin won't be coming to school anymore. The entire class buzzes with curiosity about what happened, and one of the girls explains that Huijin and her brother are both going to study abroad. This news hits Dian like a thunderbolt out of blue because her biggest obstacle is finally quitting school. The words Jis had said about taking care of the stairs she had fallen down replay in her mind. She quickly realizes that he must have known about Huijin's transfer all along. Dian rushes out of the classroom in order to talk to him about this. When she finds him and calls out to him, he turns around, but as soon as she tries to speak, she's at a loss for words and remains silent. Jis simply smiles and says, "See you later," leaving Dian to tear up. She manages to reciprocate with a soft, "See you later," before she breaks down, her emotions overwhelming her. A while later, we find ourselves in an apartment where a blonde girl is asking her friends if it's true that Zijin is moving overseas. One of the other girls confirms that it's true, saying she was shocked when she first heard but has no idea why they're leaving suddenly, as Zijin never mentioned anything about moving abroad. The blonde girl then turns to Chicken Shake, who is sitting silently and seems too preoccupied with herself to respond. One of the girls snaps her out of her reverie and asks if she has nothing to say about it. This rattles the timid girl to her core, and the blonde girl asks her directly if Zijin is really moving overseas, figuring that since they're in the same class, Chicken Shake might know more about it. Timidly and nervously, the girl confirms that it's true, and that their teacher announced it to the class earlier. The blonde girl then asks if she tried reaching Zijin directly. Chicken Shake admits she did, but Zijin didn't pick up the call. Hearing this, all the girls start to believe it might be true. Meanwhile, Chicken Shake nervously checks her phone, biting her nails in anxiety. The last message she got from Zijin was that her mother was going to take care of our boy, and ever since, Chicken Shake has been freaking out, wondering if Zijin's sudden move has anything to do with him. Just then, Zijin herself arrives in the room, looking absolutely furious. The girls are shocked to see her, and Zijin just takes a seat on the sofa, grumbling about how she barely managed to sneak out of the house. The girls ask Zijin if she's really moving overseas. Frustrated, Zijin grabs her head and says it just happened, but she explains she'll be back after one semester. We then flash back into the past, where her dad told her to spend a semester abroad, promising he'd sort everything out by the time she gets back, because he doesn't want those videos going public either. She keeps this part to herself though, and the other girls just laugh and tease her, saying she's going to enjoy her vacation. The blonde sneers, clearly annoyed by their attitude. Another girl asks why the sudden move, and if Jisoo is going too. Zijin simply says it's a family matter, and she doesn't need to go into details. The redhead girl then asks about Diane and her brother, curious about how things went, and if Jisoo managed to beat our boy or not. Zijin tells them not to ask, insisting that Jisoo probably has handled the situation already. However, we all know that she just doesn't want to admit that her brother and his lackeys got thoroughly defeated by our boy, as it would be too humiliating. She grows even more agitated, thinking about how pleased Diane will be to see her leaving the school. This irritation sparks an idea in her mind, and she decides to mess with Diane one last time, asking her friends to help with her plan. Her friends question whether it's really necessary, and even Chicken Shake jumps in talk and expresses her reluctance. But Zijin insists they should consider how cocky Diane will be without anyone to bully her. She plans to deal with Diane before she leaves Korea, wanting to make sure she gets her revenge. Chicken Shake grows increasingly anxious and terrified as Zijin continues to reveal her twisted plan. Zijin gets cocky, boasting that Diane's grandpa is a security guard somewhere, and she plans to have her mom get him fired. She believes this will teach Diane Alish's son not to mess with anyone from the Kim family. This is seriously messed up. Diane is just an innocent girl, and Zijin's plotting is enough to make anyone sick. But before this trash woman can act on her disturbing thoughts, her face goes pale when she sees a figure standing before her, cloaked in a hoodie with a mask over their face. It doesn't take long for her to recognize that it must be Jean. However, Jean pulls a classic card move and asks her who Jean is, questioning how she can be so sure when he's wearing a mask and she can't see his face. He casually explains that he's just here to check if everyone's having a good time and is quite pleased to see that everyone from the karaoke room video is present. One of the girls starts trembling and asks what he's talking about. That's when the boy reminds them he's referring to the place where they all filmed his sister getting beaten up. Huijin's face turns ashen as she realizes he might have been there waiting all along just to mess with her. Chicken Shake is visibly sweating and trembling, clearly aware of what might come next. The other two girls just sit there, utterly silent. The boy starts to shut the door, asking why no one's singing, since he thought everyone here loved to scream along to loud music. With that, he slams the door shut, leaving us with no clue about what he might do next. The scene takes us to the hospital where the Kim family is gathered. The father, and by Kim, is clearly annoyed, asking where Huijin went. Her brother explains that she stepped out to say goodbye to her friends. And Bai's irritation grows as he asks why she left when she was supposed to stay put until they had everything sorted out. Just then, a guy burst into the room, quickly turning on the TV and telling his master he needs to see what's going on the screen. It's clear that our boy has already made the videos of what Huijin did go viral. The footage is spreading fast, and the situation is quickly becoming a public spectacle. The entire Kim family falls silent as they watch the news. The reporter continues to drop bombshells, revealing that there are dozens of violent videos circulating, with many more incidents likely unrecorded. Civic groups and politicians are now proposing a special bill to bring the culprits to justice. Jisoo starts to lose his composure, and the reporter adds that the nation is especially appalled by the revelation that the culprits are the children of candidate and by Kim. It's clear that the father is in deep trouble. And it's all thanks to his outrageous wife who pushed everything to this point. Given Huijin's plan to make our grandpa jobless, it seems they're getting exactly what they deserve. We cut back to our boy being grilled by Mr. Cha, who demands to know why he went ahead with his plan when he had already come to terms with the Kim family. Our boy's mind flashes back to the past, where we find him learning all about the Kim family's deep political connections. He reveals that it was highly unlikely everything would have gone smoothly, so he did what he felt had to be done. In the present, he admits he did not honor the agreement they had. Mr. Cha questions whether he really thinks the Kim family would just let him walk away. Our boy confidently asserts that he's probably the last thing on their minds right now. It seems our boy might be right. The reporter continues to drop more bombshells, revealing recent evidence of In-by Kim's involvement in money laundering, bribery, and election fraud. The evidence is so damning that even his fellow party members are calling for a strict investigation, with everyone trying to cut ties to avoid any damage to their party. As soon as Mr. Kim hears this, he slumps down on the bed like a lifeless doll. Back with Mr. Cha, he seems to suspect that our boy has dug up some data about his past as well, and Cha does not want to get exposed to the law just like the Kim family. So, he quickly asks who our MC really is. Our boy responds simply, saying he's just an average teenager. Mr. Cha smirks at this ridiculous remark, noting that nothing about Jean is average. The scene shifts to the classroom, where the girls are feeling anxious and blushing as they see Jean. They whisper among themselves, trying to muster the courage to approach him and ask him something, but everyone remains too shy to make a move. As Jean sits lost in thought, his phone rings. It's Diane, letting him know that she can walk home by herself today and telling him to take a break and hang out with his friends. Jean is puzzled by the concept of hanging out and wonders how to go about it. Just then, one of his friends, Yong-chan, pops up and greets him. As Yong-chan sits down, he asks if he is busy today. Our boy remains silent, which prompts Yong-chan to remember that Jean always walks his little sister home, so he must be busy after school. But not surprisingly, Jean tells his friend that he's actually free today. Yong-chan's face lights up with happiness and they plan to hang out after school. However, Yong-chan's enthusiasm quickly fades when he hears an unpleasant voice. As the scene zooms out, we see these two beta bullies of the class step forward. They both reveal that they've heard the news and know that Jean is the reason Jisoo Kim is moving abroad. Yong-chan is totally shocked by the news, and the other students lounging around are equally caught off guard. The bullies spill the beans that even though Jisoo and his sister were all set to move abroad, they're stuck now because their whole family's in hot water after the info leak. Our boy jumps in to set things straight, telling the bullies they've got it all wrong, but Yong chimes in, saying there's no need for modesty because everyone knows our boy trashed Jisoo and his crew at their hideout a couple of days ago. Hyokjin backs him up, explaining that Jean took them all out by himself, and now everyone's saying Jisoo is too embarrassed to show his face at school. He's itching to hear just how badly our boy must have beaten Jisoo to make him leave the country altogether. Yong-chan is finally convinced that Jean is actually a skilled fighter and that his performance that day wasn't just luck. Hyokjin leans in and says, now that they won't have to deal with that jerk anymore, he's itching to throw a party, so he invites our boy to celebrate after school today. Hyung agrees, adding that they've been in the class for days without really spending time together, and he suggests they show our boy around the area. But our guy flatly turns them down, saying he already has plans for today. Naturally, the bullies are puzzled and ask what he's up to. With a pleasant smile, Jean replies that he's planning to hang out with Yong-chan. That's when Jae-hyung starts creeping in with his disgusting grin, leaning toward Yong-chan and saying he'll join their hangout. Hyokjin also leans closer to the terrified guy and expresses his desire to join in as well. After forcefully making Yong-chan agree, they start to walk away, saying they'll meet up later. Our boy quickly asks his friend if really wants to let these goons join in, and the poor guy stutters a positive response with a pale face. The teacher finally arrives in the classroom, and she's brought along two transfer students. One of them is a plain-looking guy, but the real standout is a stunning beauty with striking black hair. Yong-chan's eyes immediately light up at the sight of her, and our boy quickly asks if he knows who they are. Yong-chan explains that everyone knows this girl. She's Yona Sin, and her grandpa owns SW Corporation, the biggest company in Korea. The guy next to her is Seok Ko, and there are rumors that he's been with her since they were kids and is seen as her associate and bodyguard. The teacher notes that since everyone's familiar with these two, she won't waste time on introductions. She reveals that both of them have been studying in the US for the past 2 years, and will be joining the class starting today. The beta lackeys don't seem too thrilled about these two newcomers in the classroom. With just Jean before, their ancestral rule of the classroom were slim to none, but now, with these two around, they're not so sure they can even think about bullying anyone. Meanwhile, Yong-chan was curious about the two extra desks in the class, but it's clear now who they're for. He can't help but think Yona looks even more stunning than he remembered. Even the students in the class can't keep their eyes off her. As Seok behind the lady walks forward, he could not help but notice our boy, and their eyes lock for a moment. Yona too can't resist but glances at him while she is walking past him. Once both of the newcomers take their seats, Seokju tells Yona that our boy wasn't in the evaluation report he received a week ago, and he wants to double-check. Yona is intrigued and glances at our boy once more, and we can tell she is clearly curious about him. Our boy notices Yona glancing at him, and when he looks back, he finds her smiling. However, he just turns his gaze away again, which seems to irritate her since she didn't get a reciprocating smile. Meanwhile, Yongchan continues their conversation and asks if he has any particular place he wants to go. Jin says he's okay with anywhere, so Yongchan suggests hitting the game room. Well, it seems like the word gaming room triggers some memories for our boy, while his friends explain that it's nearby and just upgraded their PCs. That's when we flash back to the past, where we hear the authoritative tone of a senior telling a group of soldiers that they will begin today's portion of their practical life training program. He explains that there's one thing every Korean teenager must know, and that's the gaming room. This is the first time our boy has heard about the gaming room. The senior further explains that gaming rooms offer personal computers for a fee, and both students and adults can use them. Curious, our boy asks what people here. The senior explains that while some users browse the internet or watch X-rated videos, most people are there to play games. For the average high school student, over 90% are playing some kind of computer game. The senior then introduces some of the most common games. First up is Legends of League, followed by Battle Royale. Back in the present, our boy reflects on how he can finally make use of the major's intel. Meanwhile, Yongchan adds that they'll also grab some ramen at the game room and maybe check out Koinka afterward. Well, it seems like Koinka is yet another term our boy picked up during his military days while learning about practical life. The senior explains to him that high schoolers frequently visit Koinkareok, also known as Koinka. These establishments basically allow for sing-alongs with just a few coins. Major Khan tells our boy that he should prepare a few songs to sing in case he ends up going to one and promises to send him a list of popular songs for kids his age to learn. As our guy starts brainstorming ideas and trying to remember some songs, his friend sits nervously nearby, wondering why Jin suddenly looks so serious. Once the bell rings, the students head out for the day, and that's when we see this hottie once again. And as usual, she is with her lackey. Apparently, they're discussing our boy and discover that he transferred just a few days ago, is 18 years old, and happens to be Daein-Yu's older brother. Yona is surprised to learn that Daein has a brother because she thought her only family was her grandpa. Seokju agrees and explains that Daein has been living with her paternal grandfather since her parents and brother died in a plane crash. Yona then asks how she still has a brother. Seokju replies that it's hard to believe, but apparently, her deceased brother has suddenly come back to life just before they transfer to school. He suggests they should dig a little deeper into our boy's past. Meanwhile, it's gotten pretty late already, and we find our boy strolling alone. His phone keeps ringing with notifications from his friends, showing they had a blast at the gaming center. We flash back to the gaming club, where we see Hyokjin, our boy, Jae-hyung, and Yongchun all hanging out. Everyone is amazed by how Yongchun carried them through the game. Jae-hyung even asks about his rank, guessing it must be Diamond or Master. Their jaws drop when Yongchun timidly reveals that he's actually a challenger rank. From that moment, their attitude toward Yongchun shifts completely. In the present moment, even our boy finds this sudden change odd as they keep chatting excitedly about Yongchun's impressive rank. As he's looking at his phone, his sister arrives. He quickly asks her what she's doing here. She explains that they ran out of garbage bags at home, so she went to get some and she also picked up a few snacks. Our boy offers to carry the bags, but his sweet sister insists it's not necessary. She then asks if he was hanging out with his friends, and he confirms that he was. She feels a warm sense of relief, glad to see that he's made friends and that people aren't avoiding him because of the fight. When she asks where he went, he bluntly replies that he went to the game room. Well, it seems like this isn't exactly what she expected to hear, as she thought he might have developed different interests after living overseas for so long. Curious about her own experiences at school, he asks how things have been for her. She pauses for a moment before responding that school hasn't been this fun in years. She then asks if he also had something to eat. He nods, saying they had a blast at the game room, where every kind of snack was available. He then asks her about her plans, and she mentions that she's waiting for Grandpa to come home so they can eat together. Our boy then asks if he can join them, which confuses her since she thought he'd already eaten. He awkwardly admits that he's still a bit hungry. We already know that our boy just wants to have some quality family time. When they get home, there's a spread of delicious food laid out on the table, and they all seem to be having a great time eating together. It does seem odd that Grandpa only works a security job, yet they have such a variety of food every day. It's a bit of a mystery how they manage that. As they're having a good time eating together, our boy's thoughts drift back to his mercenary days. After a moment, he shakes off the nostalgia and is back to smiling. Just then his phone rings. It's Major Khan calling. The Major reminds him that he should just call him bro instead of using his rank. The Major asks how things are going, and our boy says he's doing well. But when the Major probes about his school life, there's an awkward silence on the line in response. Getting a bit anxious, the Major quickly asks if our boy has killed someone. Gene quickly says no, but admits he did run into some trouble that was quickly sorted out. The senior lets out a sigh of relief, and our boy reassures him that everything is fine now, and there's nothing to worry about. Kong is relieved and reminds our boy that they're always there for him. In response, Gene promises he won't forget that. The next day at school, we see the trio in class, but our boy is noticeably missing, and Young Chan seems a bit awkward among the two bullies. Jae Young starts asking odd questions. Curiously, he asks who they think would win in a fight between Jin and Sok Juko. He also points out that while Jin is good, he probably couldn't beat Sok Juko, who's been training in combat since he was a kid. To him, our boy seems like an amateur in comparison. Young agrees, adding that Sok Juko is one tough motherfudger. Young Chan then asks if it's true that Sok Juko fought against 20 dudes and won. Blonde quickly corrects him, saying it was actually 30 guys. The number leaves Young Chan momentarily stunned. He even forget to breathe for a second. Brownhead explains that when a group of street thugs was harassing Yona-sin, Sok Juko took them all out. He says it started with 10 guys, but they kept coming to be by the time 30 guys showed up, Sok Ju was still going strong. He walked off without a scratch while the 30 thugs were left unconscious on the street, like discarded toys. The timid boy then asks about the rumors he heard about Sok Ju catching the kidnappers who took Yona. He's heard that the people behind it were all retired soldiers. The blonde quickly confirms that the story about Sok Juko catching the kidnappers is probably true as well. He insists that Jin doesn't stand a chance against Sok Ju because he is on a whole other level. It's sometimes hilarious to think that teenagers in these Korean manhwa are taking down entire gangs single-handedly, making the government and all those intelligence and law enforcement departments look like they're just wasting taxpayer money. In the meantime, our boy suddenly stops in the corridor when he comes face to face with Sok Ju. Without wasting any time, Sok Ju asks him straightforwardly what he's doing here. Confused, our boy makes it clear that he doesn't understand what he is getting at. Sok Ju simplifies his approach and asks why he is lying about his identity. He mentions that he's heard our boy had a hand in Jisoo and Hui Jin Kim moving away. Jin clarifies that he did have some beef with Jisoo, but he had nothing to do with their departure. That is when Sok Ju points out that he checked with the school our boy supposedly attended overseas and they never heard of him. Things seem to be heating up, but before we get our boy's responsito Sok Ju, the scene shifts to Diane. She's approached by Yona, the stunning girl from earlier. After a while, the two ladies are catching up and Diane mentions she didn't know Yona was back in Korea. Yona explains that she just started school the day before and is actually in her brother's homeroom class. Diane perks up in surprise. Yona then points out that she doesn't remember Diane mentioning having a brother before. Diane explains that everyone thought her brother had died in the crash with her parents 10 years ago, but he survived. They only found out about his survival about 6 months ago. The scene flashes back to the past again. Diane has just returned home and finds her grandfather frozen in place while holding the telephone receiver. Tears are streaming down his face as he reveals the shocking news that Jin is alive. This revelation leaves Diane stunned, and it's how she learns about her brother's survival. Back in the present, Yona asks why no one didn't know about her brother all these years if he was alive but didn't reach out. Diane explains that Jin lost his memory in the crash and it was only recently that he started to regain some of it and someone helped them locate and reconnect with him. Yona, clearly skeptical, finds it hard to believe. Diane confirms that Jin only has faint memories of having a grandfather and a younger sister. After the interrogation, Yona flashes a pleasant smile and comments that their grandfather must have been overjoyed to get his grandson back. Yona comments that their grandfather is indeed overjoyed, explaining that after receiving the call, he cried for hours and then took time off work to enroll in cooking classes. He wanted to improve his Korean cooking skills, thinking that Jin might not have had much of that growing up. Yona comments that their grandpa must really love his grandkids and Diane smiles, agreeing that he definitely does. But then Yona throws a serious question her way, asking, is she absolutely sure Jin is her brother? Diane looks a bit surprised but quickly gives a positive response, saying Jin is definitely her brother, and they even took a DNA test to be sure. Our girl then asks why Yona is so interested in her brother. This question clearly catches Yona off guard, since she is not sure what to say. She quickly asks, almost frantically, if her brother has a girlfriend. We then cut back to our boy, who asks Seokju what the hell he's talking about. Seokju repeats his question, asking what's so important about this school that our boy had to forge his records just to be here. Jin responds by asking if he's being accused of having fake records. Siakju confirms this, saying they must be fake because, according to his research, Jin never lived in that city, and the school he claims to have attended doesn't even have a record of him. Our boy then asks about the proof, and reminds Siakju that if he's claiming the records are fake, there must be some evidence to back up the claim. Siakju is momentarily at a loss for how to counter this question. He discovered the discrepancy by digging around and talking to people connected to the school overseas, but he has no tangible proof. He's amazed at how Jin handles the situation without flinching or showing any sign of being startled. Then, our boy finally asks why Siakju is running a background check on him. In response, the blackhead explains that Hitson just sit around and watch a suspicious kid who might pose a threat to his mistress. A silence falls between them for a moment, but then, our boy finally answers, saying he came back home. Siakju is baffled by this vague response, so our boy clarifies that he was asked what he came here for, and his answer is simply that he returned from overseas for his family. With that, our boy starts to leave. Siakju stares after him with skeptical eyes, thinking that since he already suspects our boy has forged his records, it won't be long before he figures out his true identity. Once the class begins, we see Jae-hyun quietly immersed in playing video games, while the blondie scrolls through his phone idly. Our boy Jin notices that both Siakju and Yona are absent from class. He's intrigued by how quickly these two, having just transferred yesterday, managed to gather so much information about him in less than a day. When the bell rings, the beta bullies approach Yongchang, inviting him to play games and push ranks. They also invite Jin, but he declines, mentioning it's his grandpa's birthday today. The bullies decide to hang out themselves, and Yongchang is on board with that plan. Meanwhile, we're back with the Black Beauty, where Siakju is filling her in on the situation. He's convinced that Jin has definitely forged all his records and even questions the authenticity of the DNA test. Siakju further mentions that his research dug up some pretty rough stuff about his sister, Diane. Apparently, she's been getting seriously bullied by Gasukim and his sister for the past 2 years. When Yona asks just how bad it was, Siakju says it's enough to make anyone wonder how she endured the bullying all these years. He explains that the videos of her assault weren't exactly publicized, but he is pretty sure that the assault she faced was just as serious. Yona is pretty blown away and can't help but think about how messed up kids these days can be. Siakju adds that Jin's already knocked out Gasukim and his crew twice, and saved her sister from the bullying. Yona chuckles to herself, thinking it's kind of sweet that her long-lost brother comes back from the dead and takes out her bullies, while Yona's own siblings only ever seem to want to get rid of her. Yona's curiosity gets the best of her as she starts piecing things together. She points out that if Jin had really come to school with intent to target her, it doesn't make sense that he'd be so upfront about it. A smart person would have stayed under the radar. Siakju agrees, noting that someone with a real plan would have kept a low profile. Yona's mind starts racing once again, and she asks if Jin might have some kind of ulterior motive related to Diane's family. She brings up the insurance money from the plane crash. Siakju then reveals that the grandpa received it but hasn't used it, making it grow over the years. Furthermore, grandpa returned the share of money which he got for Jin's death, since he was alive, but there's still a substantial amount left, so there is still a possibility that he might be after the money. Yona connects the dots and highlights that if Jin might actually be after the money, then it could mean Diane is in danger from her own brother. The scene shifts back to the grocery store where our duo can be seen shopping. And as usual, Jin is drawing a lot of attention from the girls around. While they browse for items, Diane takes a deep breath and admits she hesitates to ask. But her curiosity is overwhelming, so she desperately wants to know what his life was like after the crash. Our boy remains quiet for a moment, and the girl starts apologizing frantically, saying he doesn't have to answer if it's uncomfortable. But he just smiles and reassures her that it's okay. He begins his story, explaining that he was deeply traumatized and could barely think straight. He did whatever he could to survive in a place where he didn't even speak the language, staying constantly busy just to get by. The girl falls silent, absorbing this heavy revelation, then she starts to chuckle and asks if he was too busy to have a girlfriend during that time. He nods, agreeing with a laugh. She then reveals that she was surprised to learn he's in the same homeroom as Yona, something Yona herself had mentioned to her. Jin is surprised to hear this and quickly asks her if she knows her. Diane explains that Yona was really nice to her before she moved to the US, and she had missed her a lot. So, when she saw her again today, it was a happy reunion. Then, with a playful grin, Diane reveals that Yona even asked her if he has a girlfriend, and of course, our boy just gives a somewhat typical reaction upon hearing this. Later, back at home, the birthday celebrations are in full swing. The siblings present their grandpa with a gift. As he unwraps it, he discovers a high-quality wallet inside, and his face lights up with joy. He's genuinely touched and feels a bit guilty for the low pocket money they have, thinking they must have spent more than they could afford. But his granddaughter just smiles warmly and reassures him that they had more than enough to get him a gift, and besides, it wasn't too expensive. The old man's hands tremble with happiness as he holds the wallet. With his voice thick with emotion, he tells them that the biggest gift he could ever ask for was already given to him when Jean came back home safe and sound. Nothing could ever top that. Suddenly, the sound of a phone ringing grabs everyone's attention. Diane rushes to her room to answer it. While she's chatting on the phone, Jean tries to eavesdrop quietly. That's when he hears the girl mention she's heading out to the convenience store for a bit. The old man questions why she's going out at this late hour, and it turns out she is heading out because Yona stopped by for a quick chat. Well, we can tell that Jean definitely senses something is off. Later that night, Jean is digging into his computer, trying to uncover all he can about SW Corporation, which Yona's family owns. He's curious why Yona seems so interested in him, and why they were running a background check on a random transfer student like him. Jean reflects on his conversation with Siakju when suddenly he hears a call from his grandfather. When he steps into the living room, his grandpa mentions he's heading out for a bit too. Our boy asks if he's going after Diane, and the old man kind of agrees. He adds that he just needs some